wash over you before we dive into this message. Father, help us to see something anew of this topic of marriage, of what a gospel-shaped marriage means. Help us to approach this text with fresh eyes, fresh hearts, open to receive maybe what we haven't heard before or known before about this profound mystery that is marriage. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Marriage. This is the reason we are gathered here today. Come on, Princess Bride fans. Love, true love. I had to throw that out there. I've been waiting so long. I preached many sermons on marriage. I've been waiting for that one. I had to get a chuckle out of you because the topic today is a tough one. And it's about the gender roles within marriage. We're going to be looking at what is the role of a husband and a wife. Now you're thinking about that movie, I know. What is the role of a husband? What is the role of a wife? Do they have distinct roles? And in a gospel-shaped marriage, what are those roles? And this is a passage, specifically when we focus on verses 23 to 24, this whole head and body thing. It's a passage that unfortunately in the church has been co-opted. It's been misinterpreted to use as a way to gain power. It's been misunderstood by and large, and this is why many women, many wives, have a particular bone to pick with this passage, and rightfully so. Because the standard definition that you've probably heard is this topic of headship. Male headship. What is that? We'll look at what that means. What does it mean when it says the husband's the head and the wife's the body? And here's a couple things of caution first. I didn't give you an outline, if you noticed today. Normally I like to provide you a nice little helpful outline so you can follow along. People say I talk too fast, and so maybe it helps you if you can follow along with an outline, but I intentionally didn't give you an outline today. And the reason why is because I know you guys are smart readers and fast readers, and I don't want you to get ahead of me on this topic. It's an incredibly sensitive topic. The roles within a marriage between the husband and the wife. And I have a jet blowing on. Always sounds better in theory to have that thing on me. What is the role of the husband and the wife? It's incredibly sensitive. And so I didn't give you an outline on purpose because I want you to process this with me, to walk along this with me. That's disclaimer number one. Disclaimer number two is this. This is an incredibly sensitive topic. It's what I call one of the grenade sermons that I have to jump on today, and I'll jump on it for you. I'll jump on the grenade. But realize that it's a grenade topic. It's such a sensitive topic because no matter where you come from, when you approach marriage, you and I do so with a specific cultural understanding of the roles of the man and the woman in marriage. Whatever you hold to believe that the husband is supposed to do in the marriage and the wife is supposed to do is largely driven, almost completely driven, by the culture in which you come out of. If you come out of a traditional, older culture, you're going to have a certain view of what the husband does and what the wife does. If you come out of a more modern, liberal perspective, you're going to have a certain perspective on what the husband's supposed to do and the wife is supposed to do in the marriage. But both of those are going to be shaped entirely by the cultural things that you call cultural norms. And what's difficult and why this passage rubs people the wrong way, this whole head and body thing, this whole wives submit to your husbands, show them respect, husbands love your wives. The reason why that eats at so many people, I believe, is because their culture has shaped the way they view gender roles within the marriage. I use this as an example. I probably overused it, but it's like asking a fish about water, okay? You go to a fish, if you can find a talking fish, find one, and ask the fish about water. And the fish will say, water what? What's water? Because the water's all around the fish all the time. And it's very hard for him to identify the difference between water and non-water. In the same way, you and I are bound to approach marriage and the gender roles within marriage, steeped in our culture and unable to step outside of it. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you, since you don't have an outline, take notes first. Secondly, I'm going to ask you to do this. Hold. Don't throw things at me today. Don't jump the stage just yet. Hold with me and walk with me through what the gospel says about the roles in marriage, not your cultural understanding. So can you do that for a little bit? You only got about 25 minutes to suspend your cultural norms and walk with me through gender roles. Because it's in here, and we got to talk about it. Paul, he tells us three things, in essence, about the gender roles in a marriage, and I'm going to title it this way. He tells us about the existence of gender roles, that there are gender roles within the marriage. He tells us the purpose of the gender roles, and then he gives us the definition of them. But it's not probably going to be what you think. And it's all nestled right in this little passage. First, the existence of gender roles. A modern day understanding of marriage, and I was talking with Dennis about this, especially where I happen to attend seminary, goes along something along the line of this. In the marriage, there is no distinction between the man and the woman. And what Paul does here, what you see, he gives a separate command to the man and to the woman. And we'll get to what he means by that in a little bit. But focus first on the fact that he does indeed give separate, what I'm calling emphasis. He says, husbands, in your marriage, you're going to have to emphasize this. Wives, in your marriage, you're going to have to emphasize this and focus on this. What he's doing there, the foundation of that is this, that in the marriage, there are indeed distinct roles. We have to first recognize that. It's not that they're indistinguishable. Paul will have none of that. He says there is a role for the husband and there is a role for the wife. We'll get to what it is, but first you have to realize that there is indeed that role. He says the head and the body. Their roles. I'm not going to belabor that point, but I bring it up because there is a modern ideology that when you get married, the one flesh, you cease to be the husband and the wife. You don't have separate roles. And we're going to see today that while the roles are interchangeable, they are indistinguishable. They aren't indistinguishable, excuse me. There's a difference between what the husband is called to do and what the wife's called to do. Now let me move on. I don't want to belabor that point too much. But first, know that there is an existence of the roles. Secondly, though, and most importantly, and this is where I'm going to spend the majority of this time, why are there roles in the marriage? Why? You have to look at what he says here. When Paul says, he gives us a metaphor of the head and the body, and oh, how it's been so misused over time. He says the husband is the head, and the woman is the body. And what he's doing in that word head, it's a word that we would get our word authority, and where he's saying basically author. The head, he says, is the author. What he's doing, he's going back to Genesis again. He's going back to Genesis. And he's saying, if you want to know why there are roles, go back to the original. Go back to the creation account of Adam and Eve. Adam, the author, when Eve comes out of him, he's pulling it back and he's saying, listen, here's the thing. What he's saying is this. In the garden, Adam's given a job. God says, name the animals. He's given a role. His role is author, namer, shaper, identifier. Think about this. Why would God do that? Why would God give him a role? Did God run out of names? You can imagine it'd be a funny scene in the garden when God's creating things and he says, this thing's furry, it's got 4 legs, but I'm plumb out of names, Adam. I don't know what to call it. Can you come? No, God didn't run out of names. What he was doing was he was giving Adam a specific role as a namer, as an author. But then something very interesting happens. And we talked about this in the last couple of weeks. God, he creates things. He's creating in the garden and back in Genesis. He creates water and he says it's good. He creates animals and he says it's good. He creates the night and the day and he says it's good, it's good, it's good. Benediction after benediction. Then he creates the man, gives him a role. And he says it's not good that you're alone. See, God designed us to have a specific role. And he says, what I'm going to do for you, Adam, is I'm going to make you a helper. And here's where I got to unpack that word. Oh, that word is so misused. Because it sounds as if you may think I'm going this direction, that it sounds as if the man's the leader, namer, he's the one who does the thing, and the woman just sits and takes notes or just helps assist. Actually, the Hebrew word for helpmate in Genesis, and this is what Paul is alluding to, that Hebrew word If you look through the Old Testament, it says there it's most often, almost always used in reference to God. And to translate it as helper is to really miss the mark. What God is saying is, Adam, I'm going to create for you a God-like helpmate that you need. Otherwise, you are incomplete, Adam. See, the purpose of the roles in marriage. You first see that there are roles. Paul makes a distinction. He says husbands do this, wives do this. But you have to see what the purpose of the roles are. Go back to the beginning. This is why when Eve is created, Adam doesn't look at her and say, I'm so happy you're here. You make me feel so good about myself. Or he doesn't say, I'm falling in love with you, Eve. He says, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, I'm incomplete without you. I can't do what I need to do without you. And the woman says, no, you can't. And there's a lot of wives who are probably thinking right now about their husbands and no, you can't do certain things without me. And the husbands are thinking, I can't do certain things without her. See the roles. It's not superior and inferior. You can't imply that. And many people do. They take the head and the body metaphor and they say, well, it goes something like this. The man's the head, so he's the leader. And the woman's the body. Do you understand how bodies work? We're not Cheshire cats. We can't go without a body. You say, oh, well, then all the decision-making's done in the head, so that means the man has to make all the decisions, right? Because that's where the brain is. Let me ask you, how does the brain survive? Oxygen. Where does oxygen come from? Blood. Where does blood come from? The heart. Where's the heart? Oh, the body. See what Paul's doing here? He's not setting up a superior-inferior relationship. You can't read it that way. What good is a headless body? And what good is a bodiless head? They're mutually interdependent, yet distinguishable. There's things, when God creates Adam, that he says, you will not be able to do. You don't need an assistant. You need a completer. You need a God-like helpmate, ladies. That's your role. Sounds a whole lot better than helper, doesn't it? Let me explain what I mean by this. And this is, I'm going to press this a little further with you. That when he says you need a helper and he creates Eve, it's not from a position of inferiority. It can't be from that. That's not what Paul is implying at all. He doesn't set up levels. Because most often, in order to help someone, you need to be better at that thing than they are. Let me explain. Most of you know my little girl who's been running around here. She's 4.5 going on 5 going on 15. And she goes to Korean preschool. And I love it because the whole point of why I wanted to go to a Korean preschool was to learn Korean and English. And she does. She speaks pretty well. I mean, as well as a 5-year-old can speak, but she can go between the languages pretty well. I, on the other hand, cannot. If you've ever heard me speak Korean, you probably winced in pain. My Korean is so bad that a few months ago, my daughter leaned forward in the car and said, Dad, please don't speak Korean to my teachers again when I pick her up from school. And I said, why? And she said, it's sad. Burn. By a 5-year-old. Now, why do I say this? Because she's now getting homework a little bit. They give her a little workbook to take home with her. And she's responsible for completing the homework, and of course the homework's in Korean. I am incapable of doing any help for her. Does that mean that I'm superior to her or inferior to her? Neither. She's got a skill set to be able to do that work that I can't do. Let me press this even further. I joke that my wife speaks 4 languages and I can't even speak 1 barely. This is why I fuddle and puddle up here all the time. Now my wife speaks 4 languages. She can be a helpmate to my daughter in the homework process. I cannot. I lack. She has. Now look, is my wife a helper in the homework process because she's inferior to my daughter? Not at all. She's a helper because she's superior. She's able to help from a position of strength, not of weakness. And let me push this even further, ladies, for when you get married, wives. My wife can help my daughter, to put this illustration even further, she can help her in a couple different ways. She can help her by doing the homework for her, for my daughter, but that wouldn't do any good. My daughter would never learn that way. So what does my wife do? In all of her vast knowledge of languages, of which she's fluent in Korean, she helps her in the homework, but she helps guide her through the process. She helps her grow in the process. She helps develop her in the process. See, helpmate. What Paul is saying is this. Husbands, you got something to focus on. Wives, you got something to focus on, and I'm about to get to that in the definition of the roles. But you have to see the purpose of the roles. If you just get hung up on this whole part of, I don't like the submission part, and I don't like this head-body metaphor, you're missing the entire meaning of the metaphor. The head's not better than the body. It can't be. It doesn't work that way. The helper is not weaker than the helpee, because the helper most often is going to have strengths that the helper-ee doesn't have themselves. And Adam knew it, because he looks at Eve and he knows, I'm lost without you. This whole job of naming and gardening Eve, I can't do without you. And I can't spend enough time on this point. I wish I need to wrap it up. But I'm a man giving a sermon about gender roles. So naturally, your brain's already probably working about where I'm predisposed towards, right? I'm biased. I'm a man. I read this passage and I say, I'm the head. I do manly things and the wife does feminine things. And Paul's saying, if you do that, you will miss the entire grand narrative and beauty of what marriage is supposed to be. The husband's different than the wife, yes. But they're interdependent. It's a head and a body working together. It's a helpmate. See now, doesn't that start to shape and change maybe what your cultural biases were between what the man does and what the woman does? And by the way, if you look at this passage, when it says wives submit and husbands love, Paul doesn't say how. He doesn't give any of the particulars. He only gives us the principle. And so you ask yourself, what does this mean? Does this mean that the husband does all the manly things around the house and the wife does all the feminine things around the house? Paul says, he doesn't say. You got to work it out. But you have to start from the position of looking at one another as helpmates, as being incomplete without the other person. You're the head, but you need the body. You're the body, but you so need the head. Not one above the other, but both interlocked together. Now, I told you I'd get to the definition of the roles. See, first we saw that there are roles, there are distinct gender roles, and we have to honor them in the marriage. But the purpose of those roles is so that you and your spouse can build each other up. How you carry out those roles is something you have to work out. Who handles the money? Who earns the money? Who does the laundry? Who cooks the food? I don't know. Work it out, Paul says. But here's the model. You and the spouse together, each functioning in a distinct role for the good of the marriage. Now, the definition. Here's where I'm going to be treading on thin ice, and I know I'm going to be treading on thin ice here. Because I can't get around the fact that Paul says, wives, respect your husbands, and husbands, love your wives. And if you're a husband, you're probably saying, I love my wife. I'm checked that box. I'm done. Here's what Paul's saying, in essence. He's not saying, husbands, love your wives, but don't respect them. That would be preposterous. And he's not saying, wives, respect your husbands, but don't love them. That would be silly. You can't respect someone you don't love, and you can't love someone you don't respect, necessarily. What I think Paul is doing here, and what many commentators are saying, is he's putting an emphasis on things, on two things, and I'm going to call them what I do anything around marriage. I call them the 2 C's of marriage. And tread with me on the thin ice for a little bit. I know. Work with me here. He does he does the 2 C's, and they're compassion and confidence. And what Paul is in essence saying is that in any given marriage, the man, the husband, is going to err towards a drive for respect and confidence. And the woman is going to err for the side of love and compassion. And I know, people here, and I know I've talked to a lot of people at Soul Grace, they say, I don't like to be, that's not me, you're a husband, you're saying, I don't need confidence, I'm a compassionate guy, I don't need confidence, I got all the confidence in the world. Wait, work with me here, okay? Because I only got 28 minutes up here, I can't break you all down. I can only go by 2 things, compassion and confidence, and you're going to fall into one of these predominantly. And you're a man, and you may say, well, I don't desire confidence, and you're a woman, you say, I don't necessarily desire compassion. Bear with me for a second. Look what Paul is saying. He's saying to the wife that in a marriage, the natural tendency is that your husband's going to crave respect and confidence. And he will look for it in every other avenue of life. But only you as the wife can give it to him the way that he needs it. And he says to the husband, look, husbands, your wives are going to err on the side of seeking out love and compassion. You're going to need to focus on that, he's saying in essence. He doesn't say, husbands, love your wives but don't respect them. He just says, listen, husbands, your wives are going to err towards the tendency. They're going to want the compassion. That's something you as husbands need to focus on. You need to work on. And if you don't believe me, go back to the beginning again in Genesis. When God curses them, what does he curse? When Adam and Eve fall and there's sin, and he curses them, he gives curses, what does he do? He curses the man's work, his source of achievement, accomplishment, respect. And then he curses, when sin comes into the world, what does he curse of the woman? He curses the relationship. He says, in childbirth, you'll have pains. What does that mean? He says, you'll have broken relationships. You'll have a broken sense of nurturing. You'll want to be a nurturer. You'll want to be nurtured yourself. And I know I said I'm on thin ice because you're probably thinking, that's not me. Stop typecasting me. But in all the times that I've talked to people about their marriage, you may not fit solely in one bucket or the other, but Paul says this is the tendency. Because sins come into the world, you're going to err on the side, husbands, of wanting confidence. And you'll need that confidence from Jesus Christ alone, who looks at you and says, you're good, you're approved, I've died for you. You'll need that from him alone, but you'll get it, Paul says, through your wife. And he looks to the wives and says, you need to do this for your husbands. On the other side, he says to the wives, you're going to have a deep, abiding need for compassion and nurturing. And you need to get it from Jesus, who's the ultimate nurturer. Jesus who says, I care, I have so much compassion for you, I'm willing to die, and I did for you. But Paul says, husbands, while on earth, you're responsible for that compassion that your wife's seeking. You have to work out the details of this in your marriage. And it'll take some work on it. But when you start to look at that from that frame point, rather than headship, leadership, husband says, I'm the boss, what I say goes. And wife, you must submit. That's not what the text is saying at all. It's saying work at it together. Get one, focus on compassion. Other, focus on confidence. That's why he says love and respect each other. How that gets worked out, I don't know. Here's a short story. I've given this before when I talked about marriage, real quick. And we're running out of time. I've tried not to talk about my marriage in this sermon series for two reasons. One, I gave my wife a no embarrassment clause that I would not embarrass her up here on the stage by talking about our marriage. I'm going to rescind that clause. I won't embarrass her today, but I'm going to rescind that a little bit. And two, it's too easy for a pastor to get up here and talk about marriage and act as if their marriage is the model of all marriages. And that's not what I'm supposing by this at any point. What I want to push into, what are the roles of marriage, is this. I'm not supposed to be here today. I didn't ever want to be here today. I never wanted to be a pastor. I swore, I want to be here today, but I mean in the macro sense of it. I never wanted to be a pastor. I want to be here. I do. I love you guys. But I never wanted to be a pastor, and I swore up and down when I was in seminary, I would never be a pastor. I was in marketing. I was in business. I had a good income. I got married. I got a great wife. We had a wonderful church in Los Angeles where we were. I could climb the corporate ladder slowly, and I was the head, right? Mm-mm. One day, my wife brings home a book, and on the book, she was researching about becoming a diplomat for the United States government. And I think it's on the back of the book or the inside, there were 13 characteristics of a diplomat, 13 traits. And I looked through the list, and something in my heart twinged or pinged or made a noise. I don't know how you even describe it. Because I looked at that list of 13 characteristics, and it is as if somebody had known my wife for years and wrote down a description of her on a page. And I said, this is it. And she looks at me and she said, well, that means you have to give up your job and you have to follow me around the world. I said, good, done. She said, well, this means we're going to be moving every 2 to 3 years. Good, done. Why? Not because I'm such a great husband, but because I saw the list, and the list was her. And I thought to myself, what a shame it would be, what a travesty it would be if we didn't at least seek this out. Now, who's the head there? Who's the leader? Was that a masculine decision or a feminine decision? Fast forward now, we find ourselves in Korea. Remember, I said I never wanted to be a pastor. Never, ever, 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 ever. I was happy in whatever lifestyle I said, never pastor, never work for the church. And we get here to Korea and we start going around looking at churches, as many of you have done. And for lack of a better term, we were really downhearted about most of the churches that we found. We couldn't find a home. And then one day, my wife turns to me and says one of the most audacious things. She says, why don't you just start a church? And I looked at her and I said, nobody will come if I do that. Honestly, what's going on there? I lacked the confidence to do it. She gave me the confidence to do it. All of you may come up to me and say the most nice things after the sermon or whatever. You may give me all the respect that I did, all the respect and confidence you could possibly dole out. But if I don't have the respect of my wife, I have nothing. See how that works? Who made the decisions in the marriage? Was it the man? Murr. Was it the female? Oh, I'll do whatever you want. No. You look at those decisions and you'll never know who was the leader, who was the head. Why? Because we were fulfilling out our mutually submissive roles to one another. I saw the list. It was her. This had to be her. We get here. She says, you start your own thing. Do it. You see what Paul's not saying? Doesn't it sound a whole lot better now? He's not saying, wives, be less than your husbands. He's saying, husbands and wives, work together, figure it out. But here's how I'll conclude. You'll never figure it out together. You'll always be asserting your headship, men, or always trying to get the wives to submit, unless you see the one who was the head of the church, Paul says. Let me ask you this. When Jesus was the head of the church, was it masculine or feminine? He died for it. That's what it means to be the head. And ladies, if you have a problem with the submission, and you say, I don't like that. What did Christ do when he came to earth? He submitted to death on a cross. Paul says in Philippians that he was equal with God, yet he considered it nothing, so that he might die for you, become a servant. What is Christian headship? It's looking at the power of Christ and what he did for you first. If you are not melted by that, you will go into your marriage with your cultural presuppositions. You'll be fighting for power. Who earns all the money? Who does the dishes? Who cleans the house? Who cares for the kids? I don't know. You have to work it out. But you have to work it out in the utter reverence, Paul says, of what Jesus Christ first did for you. How did he display headship? He died for you. How did he display servanthood? He died for you. Can you do that for your spouse and your future spouse? The song we're going to sing says this: "You are God, the God of the broken, the friend of the weak. You wash the feet of the weary, embrace the ones in need. And I want to be like you, Jesus, to have this heart in me. You are the God of the humble. You are the humble King." There are roles in marriage, and they are beautiful. Find your role. But first find Jesus. Nothing else will make sense. Sin has cursed us to demand from our spouse. Jesus' death frees us to get love from our spouse and to love them in return the way he wants you to love them. Go in prayer now. Reflect on this truth. The truth that the gospel